Day two of the transfer portal featured Donovan Dent, a couple other interesting names, some reported Kansas interest, a Zoom call for KU, all that, and what are some of the biggest questions for Bill Self and KU basketball about this portal offseason for the Jayhawks?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day. Thank you to the Everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcasts, on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe, or on the audio side of things, anywhere you get your podcast. Give us a 5-star review, thumbs up if you could on either one. Certainly helps from our end of things. So on today's episode, we're going to be talking the day two portal splashes from transfer portal entries in college basketball and I guess some of the latest news surrounding the transfer portal with Kansas Jayhawks basketball. We're also going to get into the biggest questions for Bill Self and KU, looking into their offseason approach this year. And then we're going to finish up talking a little bit about Darryn Peterson and why I think having him in tow for KU should be a good thing that only helps them in the transfer portal. Let's start right there with some of the latest news with some of the day two portal splashes. And again, I'm recording this on Tuesday night, listening to this on your Wednesday morning. There's probably a good chance that there's some other people that have entered in between by the time I'm recording this and it opens back up, because it is incredible how quickly everything is moving and how many players are already in the portal, even with 16 teams still remaining in the NCAA tournament. But the big one today was Donovan Dent. And Donovan Dent was just playing in the NCAA tournament on Sunday night, lost a close game to Michigan State. He had a great season. He really had two great seasons in New Mexico, 3 full seasons there, but 2 seasons of all conference level. This past season, over 20 points per game for New Mexico, really good assist numbers, over 6 per game, gets to the foul line, good driver, good transition player, just a really good player overall is Donovan Dent. And to me, he immediately becomes the number one target for KU, forget the position, just number one overall target for KU in the portal. Thing is, for a lot of other schools, he's the number one target as well, right? I saw something about him saying Kentucky was like a dream school, and that could just be something that was taken out of context in a positive way to spin it that way. But there's some rumors about his former coach at New Mexico that he could be getting a job somewhere else. Does he follow him? There's a lot of things that it could be. But the fact is that now that he is on the open market, we know Kansas has a strong NIL game. They have a strong reputation of following through with those NIL payments. To a point where, you have an opportunity to come in and be that next great Kansas guard who can score the basketball. You would think Kansas at least gets themselves in a position to give themselves the best shot possible at a kid like this. And envisioning a backcourt with Donovan Dent and Darryn Peterson would just be, it just gets you salivating thinking about the potential that those guys would have. So that is very interesting and will be one that we continue to keep an eye on. Another guy that we are keeping an eye on to see what would happen there, I guess there's still a possibility. I guess he goes through the draft process and maybe enters the portal in the end. We've seen that happen many times with players. But Keyshawn Hall was a name that I think a lot of KU fans were circling, the player at UCF who really torched KU the last 2 times he played them. Really good kind of wing 4-man who can score the ball, rebound. He's entering the draft process. Now, again, is that something where he's for sure just going to be in the draft? Or is it something where he's going to eventually come back and enter the portal and keep all his options open? That will be one to track as well. According to CBB content on Twitter, Cooper Schweiger, which is somebody we briefly touched on yesterday's episode, thank you to Everydayers already catching that one, who is a center from Valparaiso, previously tipped the net. It's reported that KU had interest in him. 6'10", 230 pounds. He will be a junior. About 16 points, almost 8 rebounds per game, 2 blocks per game. So good numbers there from the raw stuff. Field goal percentage, 49%, a little lower than you like from a center. But a big reason why is he takes almost 3 threes per game at 30%. So that lowers the percentage there. Really good free throw shooter. Somebody who had a good on-off defensive rating, and he finished in the 81st percentile in Hakeem rate in terms of the block plus steal percentage, 83rd percentile in defensive rebounding rate. He had good performances against Ohio State, and over the back end of the season, went to Blue Valley Southwest, so he's a local kid. He is somebody who's of interest where it's like, when you're looking at the big market, I think for KU, you're either looking at one of two things. You're looking at somebody who can come in and be like the Parker Brown role, where you're saying, hey, we just need somebody reliable to come in who's okay being a backup big man that's going to play 6, 8, 10 minutes in a specific game, and you're going to play your role, but you're going to get good NIL payment. You're going to get good notoriety being here at Kansas and those sort of things. That's one possibility. The other possibility is, do you go for a center who is going to be good enough that you can play him like him and Flory together for 5 to 10 minutes per game? I still would like a big wing, an athletic wing at the 4 for a majority of the time. But if you play a big athletic wing for 25 to 30 minutes at the 4, and then the other 10 to 15 are two big basketball, I think I can get on board with that as long as it's the right two bigs. And so when you look at Schweiger, or somebody who can shoot the 3 a little bit, I think you could get away with playing him next to Flory in addition to him being your backup 5. So it becomes interesting that there was the Zoom call. Now, I have seen some other stuff that maybe he wants a bigger role somewhere else, that maybe it's not just going to be about, the local kid coming home and, I'm content in whatever role I can get to. I don't know if that's going to end up being the case. So we'll see if Kansas can convince him in the end to do that, or if he, shoots for a bigger role at some other school. Couldn't blame him if that's what he decides to do. Some other interesting names entered today, though, or I guess today at time of recording. Elliot Cadeau is the former point guard from North Carolina. And he is interesting to me in terms of like, I don't want Kansas to get Elliot Cadeau because I think we've seen enough these past couple years of a Bill Self system without a point guard who can really create his own shot at a high level. I mean, there are so many years we were spoiled with stud point guards, right, who could get their own shot, from Mario Chalmers to Sharon Collins to Frank Mason to Devontae Graham to, Devon Dotson, right? Those are the legendary guys in the Bill Self time, and that seems to work well in his system. So I would like a point guard who has that ability, right? And Elliot Cadeau, I think, is a good player in what he does. He's a good passer. He did at least show improvement from 3 from this year to last year, that maybe there's another level there, and he's former 5-star recruit who reclassed up. So realistically, he should only be a sophomore next season. There's reason to think he will be a good player next year, and that he did have some good things about his game at North Carolina this year. I'm just not really interested for the specific fit. But what if Bill Self goes, I've enjoyed playing with, because as much as we haven't enjoyed the results, Bill Self really liked DeJuan Harris. Would he want to go back to a pass first point guard? I don't know. I hope that's not the case, but it is somebody to keep an eye on, who I think could be a good player at his next school. I just don't think it should be Kansas, I guess. Michael Rataj, I don't know if that's the right way to pronounce it. He is a 4-man that becomes interesting entering the portal here today. Transfer from Oregon State, who you have to still get out of your head, like, transfer from the Pac-12, like another power conference. Like, no, it's coming from the WCC now. But he's a 6'9" forward. He's somebody who could play next to Flory. Not the best athlete in the world, but he's a skilled player. And I think that would be kind of an interesting combo, right? Because if you have Flory, this hyper-athletic 5, with somebody who is more skilled, right, that can be kind of a fun combo that you can play off each other. And I've seen some people be like, he's a like I don't know, a 2.0 version or a B version or whatever you want to say, like a knockoff version of Jalen Wilson. Like, he's a not as good version of Jalen Wilson. I actually see a different version of Perry Ellis, like a version of Perry Ellis that's a little bit bigger, but that has less skill around the basket, like less post moves around the basket. He didn't shoot super well on 2-point shots. But I see a little bit in terms of that vein, which somebody brought this up to me, and apologies, I'm blanking right now. I wasn't planning on bringing this up, but I just thought about it. So somebody brought this up to me on social media, on X, on Twitter, whatever you want to call it. They're like, you look back at a lot of the best Bill Self teams, they've had somebody at the 4 who can be kind of a matchup problem, who can be a scorer. And it's such a good point. You think of like Darrell Arthur, and you think of Perry Ellis, and you think about it's been different iterations. Like Jalen Wilson was more of a wing. When you threw Christian Brown out there at the 4, Ochai at the 4, however you viewed that when they were together, it gave you a matchup problem at the 4, and those have been the best Bill Self teams. And so from that standpoint, like, can he be a big enough matchup problem for other teams? That remains to be the question. Like, is he too is he athletic enough to play the 4 for you? Does it help having Flory in that regard? It's an interesting one. Maybe not one that I would view as like the top target or anything like that, but it is an interesting name to kind of keep an eye on there. And then some other reported interest, I guess, that you would mention of note by Joe Tipton of Tipton Edits on Josh Dix, which kind of furthers what we've been talking about in terms of, the impact that he could possibly have. Caleb Glenn, which is kind of an interesting wing from previously Louisville, and then last year Florida Atlantic. Hasn't really won wherever he's gone. Pretty good 3-point shooter. Not sure what else he does, but interesting there because KU needs 3-point shooting. Malik Renault, which kind of goes into the category of Elliot Cadeau to me, which I just realized they rhyme, in terms of like, you can be a good player. I just don't love the fit at Kansas. So, again, keep an eye on there. DeAndre Thomas, Jaden Young, Anthony Robinson, those three I grouped together because they'd probably be more like developmental or back end of the bench type pieces, if it is true. It's also important to remember that some of the lists you see on social media are not accurate. Some of them are agents putting a school like Kansas in there to boost the rest of the list. A lot of times you can kind of snuff that out by like, oh, the rest of the schools on there are, I don't know, no disrespect to these schools, I guess, but like it's like Santa Clara and Pepperdine and Richmond and Kansas. It's like, well, that doesn't seem to add up. That sometimes that's the case, that you're using it to boost it up. Other times the kid is. And it's like Bill Self and Kansas aren't going to come out and be like, no, that didn't happen. Because it's just going to be a bad look for them, right? And it's going to burn a bridge with the agent. So you do have to keep that in mind. And that makes it very difficult because it makes it difficult for us. It makes it difficult for you, the fan, to be like, okay, what is actually like a real interest from KU and what is not? So some interesting names enter the portal, some other ones that we'll get to on later episodes of the show. We'll start doing deep dives later this week as well. But what are the biggest questions for Bill Self as he approaches all these names in the portal and for KU in the offseason about how they want to approach it and what types of players to go for? Today's episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're into plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400-plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code S-H-5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com, code S-H-5. Thank you for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. Thank you to every day who's catching all of our shows. Plenty more transfer portal content now until football season, basically. So buckle in for that. We'll have KU football content in the offseason too for you. So this is obviously, it always is a big offseason. You always have, lots of decisions to make in the portal era in terms of how much money you want to spend on this player and that player. Do you want this player coming back? Do you want to bring in this player from the outside, right? There's a billion players to choose from in the transfer portal. So many decisions to be made. Obviously, this one is utmost importance, though, for KU after how the last couple of seasons have gone, both in terms of the overall record and output, as well as the results that you've mustered from the transfer portal. So obviously, when you look at the big decisions that Bill Self has to make, I mean, number one is obviously the decisions of who to bring back. And I think that goes beyond just who to bring back. This is no longer just, who do I want back? Okay, cool, they're coming back. And who do I show the door and tell, hey, you're probably not going to play next year. You should probably go somewhere else. This is now also, and it always was a two-way street in terms of the player could transfer, but now it's like a three-way street. The third street becomes the agent, or the handler, the family, or whatever you want to view as that party. And the combination of the agent or the handler, that party, and the player can sometimes turn into one lane. Sometimes it can be two. And this also becomes a situation of how bad do you want certain players back, right? Like there could be a certain guy you want back, but you want him back for a specific role. or you want him back for a specific amount of money or within a specific range of money. And all of a sudden the agent or the player is going, hey, I want double that. And you're like, well, at that point, I'd rather just let you walk and we'll just use it somewhere else, right? That becomes a new decision that you have to make in this current age of the game as well. But I think the more pressing issues right now, because obviously, you do have to make sure, Kansas has to make sure they figure that stuff out to bring back a guy like Flory Badunga and stuff, because as much as, been banking on the idea of having a sophomore year Flory who goes off, like there is no guarantee, right? In today's day and age with the portal. But you also have to make these decisions externally. What type of player do you want to add? So when you look at the different positions, I think of the guard position for KU, what type of player is Bill Self going to want to add? Is he going to want a more pure point guard, like the conversation we were having earlier about Elliot Cadeau? Is that what he's going to want more, knowing that, hey, we got Darryn Peterson. I just want somebody who's going to, set him up with the basketball. Do you want somebody who's more of a combo guard? That to me would be kind of the ideal situation. Bill Self has done so well with combo guards. The guys who can pass it a little bit, can bring it up a little bit, can score it a little bit. Those have been the guys that he has had so much success with. Like that was Devontae Graham coming out of high school and stuff like that. And then that was kind of Mario Chalmers even coming out of college. So there's other guys that applies to as well. But then, like, what about the size of the point guard? Do you require a 6'2" and above, or 6'3" and above, or do you not care? Can it be 5'9" if it's this electric jitterbug? Do you want a somebody who is more of a scorer? Do you want somebody who's more of a driver? Do you want somebody who's more of a 3-point shooter? Do you want somebody who's more of a passer and defender? Or, and it feels like in past years, the answer to a lot of these questions has just been who's just the best player in a vacuum. It hasn't necessarily been based on fit or this is what I want. It's been, best player, big dollar sign, let's get him, right? And I don't know that that's the best way to do things. Maybe the guard position, that is one where you do it. You just say, give it the best player because you can make a lot work probably around Darryn Peterson, but I would prefer somebody who is able to hit some shots. Now, if you do bring in like a 3-point shooting wing and, then at that point, maybe it makes more sense if they're an off-ball player to bring in somebody who can create their own shot. If you bring in somebody on the wing who needs the ball in there, like hypothetically, if Keyshawn Hall withdrew from the draft and transferred to Florida, do you say, okay, well, between Peterson and Keyshawn Hall, those two guys are going to have the ball in their hands enough. Maybe we do go for a point guard who is more pass first, but can knock down an open three, even if they're not really creating threes, and be a good defender. Maybe that's more the archetype you go to. So that's going to be an interesting decision for KU and Bill Self. But again, you have to have that plan B, plan C based on the other players you acquire as well and kind of pivot from there, right? Because they all affect each other. At the 4-man, like, what do you go with? That's another big decision you have to make. Do you go with like a traditional power forward who's, I guess in today's day and age, traditional power forward means you're probably shooting 2 or 3 threes, but you are more of a big man in trade. You can probably play a little bit of 5 and slide down there. Does Bill Self go for that? I feel like maybe that's the way he'd want to lean. I think he likes playing 2 big basketball. Does he want to go for more like big athletic wing? Or does he want to go for more of a like stretch type? And that could be a wing who shoots threes, or that could be a 4-man who's a kind of stretch 4, so to speak. My preference would be getting like a big athletic wing. But, I feel like Bill Self is going to want more of that big man who can play the 4 or the 5, especially if it's next to Flory, because there were times that Flory was out muscled down low. There were times that Flory maybe struggled with defensive rebounding. So maybe you try to find the best 4-man at defensive rebounding, knowing that Flory's a good offensive rebounder, but he was still working on the defensive rebounding, that it would help maybe fill in that gap, right? What do you look for in a backup big? Are you looking for somebody who is just going to be the backup center? Or are you looking for somebody who can, play the 4 and 5 position if you're Kansas? Or if you go for that traditional power forward at the 4, then are you just looking for a backup at the big position? I think based on what I'm hoping, based on all these things, like I am hoping for a combo guard, somebody who can create his own basket, somebody who can, score off the bounce, because it gets tiring if Darryn Peterson has to do it every time. Like Darryn Peterson should have the ball in his hands a majority of the time and should be the guy creating a majority of the time. You still need somebody else for when Darryn Peterson goes on the bench. You need somebody else for, what if the other team double teams Darryn Peterson? What if the other team has such a good defender, or Darryn Peterson, as a freshman is having an off night? Can somebody else get buckets? And you look at the best teams in the country, they have multiple guys on the floor. I had a theory after Kansas won the title a couple of years ago that you need at least 4 players on the court at all times who can get their own bucket. Now, that can come in a different version of ways, right? Like I counted David McCormick to that because if you got him the ball in the post, he could get a bucket for you, right? So it comes in different ways. The center can be posting up. As a point guard, it does have to come from you creating the basket. Like I would count Jalen Wilson in that way, in the same way that it wasn't always like, freeing himself up to shimmy and shoot a jump shot like Devontae Graham could, but it was the ability to, at any point, Jalen Wilson could create a bucket by driving to the rim or get to the free throw line and grind his way to points. And I think you need at least 4 guys who can do that for you. Like, if we look at some of the best teams in the country, I bet you a lot of them kind of pass that test. Like Houston's the one that pops up in my mind because we've seen them so many times in the Big 12. But it's like, obviously, LJ Cryer can get his own bucket. Milos Uzan can get his own bucket. Emmanuel Sharp can get his own bucket. Those are all double-digit scores at guard positions. And we saw that with Juwan Roberts, like he can get his own bucket. We saw that in the game in Allen Fieldhouse. If you get him one-on-one, like boom, he can get his own bucket. Now, they don't really have a center who can get their own bucket. There are more guys who are going to catch lobs and throw down dunks, but boom, that's 4 guys. So I think the best teams have that. So you want that in a combo guard. I would like a big wing, 6'7", 6'8", who's athletic, and therefore the athleticism translates into good rebounding. I think people forget that Jalen Wilson, who was starting for the national championship team, obviously Jalen ended up shooting well from 3 his final season at Kansas the next year. But the year that Kansas won the title, Jalen Wilson could not buy a 3-point shot. I think he finished 26 or 27% on the season. But I want to say over the course of the NCAA tournament, it was really bad. I remember he airballed 3 in the national championship game. But I'm not advocating. I prefer a guy who's able to shoot the 3 at the 4, obviously. But I guess what I'm saying is I'm prioritizing athleticism. And yes, you could say, oh, they had athleticism at the 4 with KJ Adams this past season. Okay, but you didn't have the rebounding. And that's where I'm going with the athleticism and the rebounding, right? To kind of combine for those things. And ideally, he's able to at least shoot a little bit. I don't know. Is he able to because in that case, at least Jalen Wilson could shoot 3s, or the defense might have had to respect it a little bit. Teams still sagged off of it, but it at least is in the game where they don't have to sag off you completely all the way to the paint. At least they're sagging off to the free throw line or something. So that would be interesting to me. And then I would want to back a big who can play the 4 or the 5 that can play either style. If you get a good enough big, I love the Magoon Guath kid at San Diego State because he could play the 4 or the 5 next to Flory, or Flory could play the 4, he could play the 5. You could have a little bit of crossover for 5-10 minutes per game, and one plays 20 minutes at the center, the other plays 20 minutes at the center. Both are elite shot blockers. If that's the right scenario, sure. But the biggest thing in all this, honestly, above and beyond what archetype or what player you'd like them to get, it's can you find the right fits? I thought Ben McCollum, the now head coach at Iowa, had something very interesting to say about this in a post game, and I'm just going to take the little excerpt that is prevalent here. He talked about the players that he wants are the ones that show toughness and winning. And for so many years with Bill Self, that was Kansas winning the Big 12. They did it with toughness and winning. Of course, they had talent and they had first-round draft picks and stuff. They had other years, though, where they didn't have the most talented team in the country, but they're still winning the league because they had good players, even if it wasn't first-round draft picks, and they had the toughness and that winning motto. And I kind of think the idea of having 8 starters that they wanted last year is dead. Guys have to be content getting good NIL money to be an 8th guy, and you have to be open about that. I don't think that you can go into it being yeah, you could work your way into a starter. I think almost you have to view it as 6 starters maybe. You still need shooting, you still need skill, you still need scoring, but I think above all, the toughness and the winning, that is something KU needs to be directed as. Now, the difficult part in this is, how do you fault a kid if the rest of the team is just really bad, or if the coach is bad, if his team wasn't winning, but he's a really good player, right? I think when you hear winning, it's less about did the player have a winning record. It's just one of those things you just know it. Is the player a winner? Is he somebody where when they're losing those games, he's pissed and that's part of the reason he's transferring because he wants to win? Or is he cool that he put up 15 and 10 that game, even though they lost, and now he's transferring to get a bigger payday? And I don't know, maybe you can't unearth that stuff in these short conversations because of how fast this moves. But I certainly found that to be very interesting there from Ben McCollum. All right, that'll do it for what questions we have for Bill Self. I'm sure many more will arise. But what is the importance of Darryn Peterson in the portal? This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. There's surprising insights, which allows you to, when you're using Monarch, you can realize how much you're spending on food delivery or something that maybe you shouldn't be spending as much on, so you can help you budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year with Monarch Money.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Well, make sure to check out Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. Catch up around the portal, the NCAA tournament, all that good jazz. Okay, so Darryn Peterson committed to KU, and this was interesting. This was something posted by Michael Swain, who does great work at fog.net, and he was saying in this quote, this was when he was in Lawrence this past weekend, quote, "I know I'm coming next year. A lot of people have been hitting me up, just saying they can't wait for me to get here, expecting me to play well." Now, the context of that could be taken as it's, people he knows, or, somebody who's not even in college basketball, right? It could just be like normal people, essentially friends and family, right? But I got to thinking about this more, and you see the KU players who went out to the event, and like some of them might even not be at KU next season, right? They might end up entering the transfer portal. We'll see. But like with Darryn Peterson, the hype is so insane that it draws you into it. And it's not just like a fan thing or a coach thing or whatever. I'm sure if you're another player, like, why would you not want to play with him? A couple of reasons. I mean, one, you think about it, it's going to elevate your game, right? And if you are a player who can complement Darryn Peterson, A, a lot of scouts are going to be watching those games every time. B, it's going to make you look better because people are going to be so drawn in on the defensive end to Darryn Peterson that, all of a sudden you end up with maybe a few more open shots or a few more open dunks or something. It's going to help your game in the very end. Then you also look at this, and there is a little bit of like the coolness factor of being able to be like, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 30 years from now, tell your kids, tell your grandkids, there's no deep down that like, yeah, I got to practice with, I got to play one-on-one with and practice. I got to play with this dude who ended up being the number one pick in the draft, who ended up being a 5-time NBA All-Star or whatever it is, right? That's pretty cool, And so I can't help but think like that's got to be part of the recruiting pitch for Bill Self in the portal, right? Like if you talk to one of these kids, hey, you want to play with the guy who's going to go number one in next year's draft and have more scouts watch you each and every game and have the opportunity to do that, you don't get to float that around very often, right? Maybe John Calipari's been able to float that, or Coach K or John Shire. Kansas hasn't got to float that as often, right? And so I do think it is something where if you're some of these other players, if you're a shooter, you want to get open shots, you play with Darryn Peterson. You a big man, you want to get some open lobs, you play with Darryn Peterson, You just want to win some games. You want to have a cool opportunity to play with a really talented dude. You want to get under NBA scouts, like you want to get them to like you even more because you do a lot of the dirty work, and they're like, you know what, Darryn Peterson's the guy. He's going to go number one, or he's going to go number two in the draft, or whatever it ends up being. But I got to tell you, I've been watching a lot of these Kansas games, and that kid is a winner. He's doing all this, and that. We should take him in the early second round. We should take him in the late first round. I don't know, man. I think Darryn Peterson only has to help. The KU has him in tow with the rest of their recruiting process this offseason. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll start doing some deep dives on transfer targets for KU coming up on tomorrow's show and the rest of the week. See you then with LOJ.